This year alone, Israel has conducted an attack, an unprecedented attack against the United Nations. It has attacked physically through artillery, weapons, bombs, UN premises. 70% of UNRWA offices on UNRWA buildings, clinics, distribution centers have been hit and shelled by the Israeli army.
I think
How about the idea of an arms embargo? In other words, no more weapons from the U.S. to Israel.
Would be incredible. I would wish it more than anything. Yes.
Okay. Hello, my name is Stanley Heller. Welcome to the Struggle Video News. The UN Special Rapporteur on the situation of human rights in the Palestinian territories has called for Israel to be suspended from membership in the United Nations. Francesca Albanese said so in a major new report. She makes a good argument here in 4 minutes on Democracy Now!
First of all, let me unpack the question of the unseating Israel, because this is one of the recommendations I made in my report on the Article 6 of the UN Charter. A member state can be suspended of its credentials, of its membership by the General Assembly upon recommendation of the UN Security Council. And the first criticism I got is that we cannot do that because every state commit international law violations. Absolutely, absolutely. But there are two striking features here. First, Israel is quite unique in maintaining an unlawful occupation, which has deemed such in at least one full occasion, but again, there was already a case brought before the ICJ in 2004. So there have been 2 ICJ advisory opinions. There is a pending case for genocide. There has been the violations of hundreds of resolutions on Israel, occupied Palestinian territory, by the Security Council, the General Assembly, the Human Rights Council, and steady violation of international humanitarian law, human rights law, the apartheid convention, the genocide convention. So this is quite unique. But all the more, this year alone, Israel has conducted an attack, an unprecedented attack against the United Nations. It has attacked physically through artillery, weapons, bombs, UN premises. 70% of UNRWA offices on UNRWA buildings, clinics, distribution centers have been hit and shelled by the Israeli army. 230 UN staff members have been killed by Israel in Gaza alone. UN peacekeepers in Lebanon have been attacked. And this doesn't even take into account the smear, the defamation against senior UN officials, the declaration of the Secretary General as persona non grata, the referring to the General Assembly as a cloak of anti-Semites. Again, this has mounted to a level, the hubris against the United Nations and international law has been unchecked and unbounded forever. But now, especially after the Knesset passed a law outlawing UNRWA, declaring UNRWA a terrorist organization, and therefore disabling it from its capacity to deliver aid and assistance, especially in Gaza and the West Bank and East Jerusalem. This is the nail in the coffin of the UN Charter, and it can also contribute to that sense of colonial erasure, because here it's not just at stake the function of a UN body, and UNRWA is a subsidiary body of the General Assembly, so it's even more serious. But there is the capacity of UNRWA to deliver humanitarian aid in a desperate situation, and also the fact that UNRWA is seen by Israel as the symbol of Palestinian identity, especially the Palestinian refugees. So there is an attempt to erase Palestinianness, including by hitting UNRWA.
Israel has murdered scores of UN workers for UNRWA and is shooting at UN peacekeepers in Lebanon. it has declared the UN Secretary General persona non grata. It slanders the UN General Assembly, saying it's a club of anti-Semites. It just declared the 75-year-old UN agency, UNRWA, as a terrorist organization. Israel is at war with the UN. Why should it have a seat in that international body? Sure, if Israel were to be suspended from the UN, it would be immediately to be defended by the U.S. empire. But Israel would suffer another blow to its prestige, and that matters to those people. And it would have an important piece lost in its racist armor. An important development: over 1,000 writers, some quite prestigious, have signed a statement refusing to work with Israeli institutions that are involved with Israeli crimes. Let me read part of the statement. We have a role to play. We cannot in good conscience engage with Israeli institutions without interrogating their relationship to apartheid and displacement. This was the position taken by countless authors against South Africa. It was their contribution to the struggle against apartheid there. Therefore, we will not work with Israeli cultural institutions that are complicit or have remained silent observers of the overwhelming oppression of the Palestinians. We will not cooperate with Israeli institutions, including publishers, festivals, literary agencies, and publications that A, are complicit in violating Palestinian rights, including through discriminatory policies and practices, or by whitewashing and justifying Israel's occupation, apartheid, or genocide, or have never publicly recognized the inalienable rights of the Palestinian people as enshrined by international law. To work with these institutions is to harm Palestinians, and so we call on our fellow writers, translators, illustrators, and bookworkers to join us in this pledge. We call on our publishers, editors, and agents to join us in taking a stand, in recognizing our own involvement, our own moral responsibility, and to stop engaging with the Israeli state and with complicit Israeli institutions. We often quote from the Israeli newspaper Haaretz. It is often called Israel's paper of record. Though its articles have to be pre-approved by Israel's military censorship, it has still done some excellent exposés. It also has several columnists like Gideon Levy and Amira Haas who bravely promote humane values. Its publisher is a man named Amos Shakin. In his speech at a conference in London last week, Shakin stated the Netanyahu government doesn't care about imposing its cruel apartheid regime on the Palestinian population. It dismisses the costs of both sides for defending the settlements while fighting the Palestinian freedom fighters that Israel calls terrorists. By saying the words Palestinian freedom fighters and apartheid, he enraged Israeli fascists and government ministers. They want a witch hunt. They are demanding the government break off all relations with the newspaper, and especially stop placing legal ads and such in Haaretz. Much respect to Amos Shakin. Some good news. The California Federation of Teachers, which has 120,000 members, is calling on the state pension fund to sell off stock in companies that profit from human rights violations, apartheid, and genocide. Of course, the offending companies that come to mind are ones tied to Israel. An Instagram feed called CalSTRS Divest for Palestine has explained things in 11 slides. The teachers' fund is called CalSTRS, California State Teachers Retirement System. CalSTRS actually has a code of ethics, and the teachers' union wants it enforced. The fund has assets totaling $346 billion. It has over $7 million in stock in the infamous Israeli company Elbit Systems. It has much more in companies that ship weapons to Israel, and nearly $200 million invested in Boeing. Near $85 million in General Dynamics, which supplies parts of the Mi-80 bomb, and $44 million in Palantir, a company whimsically named after a sort of crystal ball in Lord of the Rings. That company helps police and other agencies spy. And $213 million invested in Caterpillar, a company whose bulldozers smashed Palestinian homes and killed American Rachel Corrie in 2003. $95 million for a company providing fuel for Israeli planes. They call on union members to take action all over the country, a worthy goal since its parent body, the American Federation of Teachers, is led by Randi Weingarten and other blind supporters of Israeli apartheid and its killing machines. There's an effort led by Senator Sanders to stop weapons deliveries to Israel. It's a tactic of filing joint resolutions of disapproval. They will be sent to the floor of the Senate this month. It's not likely they'll be passed, but just getting them debated and forcing senators to vote yes or no will be a major achievement. You could help out with this effort by calling your senators and leaving messages. Scan this code for a sample script and phone numbers of senators. On November 10th, there'll be a grim anniversary. On that date, the Israeli military demanded the medical staff leave Al-Naser Hospital in Gaza City on pains that the hospital would be bombarded. After much reluctance, the staff agreed, but told the Israeli authorities that 5 tiny babies were in the hospital, hooked up to machines, and they could not be taken out. Operatives for the Israeli Defense Ministry ensured the head of the hospital that the babies would be taken care of. Weeks later, Mohammed Balusha, a Palestinian reporter for an Emirati channel, returned to the hospital. To his horror, he found out that the babies had not been transported. Instead, they were left to die and their bodies were still in the ward, decomposing. The story was picked up by the Daily Mail in the UK, CNN, the Washington Post, even the Wall Street Journal. The New York Times never said a word about it. We created a petition to the New York Times to report on this atrocity. We asked them to ask the Israelis about the fate of the reporter, Balusha, who broke the story. He's in Jabalia camp. He was actually shot several weeks later after reporting on what had happened in Al-Naser Hospital. 1,000 people signed the petition, but the New York Times has never responded. This atrocity must not be forgotten. The recent rabbinical statement from JVP mentioned what had happened to babies. We will not forget. Now a portion of my interview with Lillian Rosengarten. Her parents fled Nazi Germany in the 1930s. In the 1970s, Rosengarten was impressed by what she saw in Israel. But as the decades passed, she learned what Israel had done to the Palestinians. Lately, she signed a statement by Jewish Voice for Peace from survivors of the Holocaust and their descendants. Here's part of the interview. I'll be speaking to Lillian Rosengarten. She's an author of Survival and Conscience: From the Shadows of Nazi Germany to the Jewish Boat for Gaza. She's a clinical social worker and psychoanalyst. She's a poet, writer, mother, grandmother, and progressive human rights activist. Good afternoon, Lillian.
Hello. Hello. Thank you for having me.
A few days ago, the Rabbinical Council of the Jewish Voice for Peace came out with a rather startling statement. It starts off saying, the state of Israel is currently perpetrating a holocaust, the deliberate mass slaughter of Palestinian people with weapons provided by the United States. That's about as strong a condemnation as you can make. Have you seen that statement?
I've seen it, and I was very excited to see it. Yes.
Okay. So what do you think about that claim of a new Holocaust?
Well, I think it's an important claim, but it gets terribly confused between Israelis and people like myself, because the Israelis think it is a Holocaust, but that the Nazis is Hamas. And I think it's a Holocaust and the Nazis are the Israelis.
Yeah.
That's how it's tremendously different.
The statement says it demands an immediate weapons embargo and an end to the genocide of Palestinians. Do you agree?
It's hard to answer that. I mean, it has to end, but this is not what my thinking was. Of course, it has to end and someone has to end it, but it isn't going to end immediately. I think
How about the idea of an arms embargo? In other words, no more weapons from the U.S. to Israel.
Would be incredible. I would wish it more than anything. Yes.
Okay. Let me ask you about your family and history, if I may. When and where were you born?
I was born in Frankfurt am Main in 1935.
Germany, for those who don't know. And when and how did your family leave Germany?
It was very difficult. My parents were very wealthy in Germany, and non-religious socialists, basically. And one night when my mother was pregnant with me, they took a walk on the street and they were accosted by the
brown shirts?
Brown shirts, and my father was beaten and he was laughed at with his nose, and it was really pretty awful. And my father decided then that he had to leave. And so he left, but it took a long time for him to get a sponsor, for him to be allowed to send for my mother and myself. But he was able to, but it was not easy.
So what year is this now?
I came over in 37.
In 37.
It was toward the end.
He came to the U.S. a couple years earlier.
My mother, yes.
I see. Now you were just an infant or a small child when all this was going on.
Yes.
So you don't have any firsthand remembrances. But did your family talk to you about Germany during your?
My father read Aufbau. I knew about my parents' history, but I wanted to be American.
Yeah.
I didn't want anything to do with it. And it
Uh-huh.
was for years and years that I stayed away from my German Jewish background.
Uh-huh.
Very strange, yeah.
What about your extended family? I mean, your mother and do you have brothers and sisters who
I,
came with
I
you?
have a sister who is mentally ill,
Uh,
a whole bunch of, and I don't have much of an extended family. Friends of my parents, I don't know. Most of them have died.
but
Pretty
did
much.
you learn later about what happened to their friends during
Well,
the
I
Holocaust?
learned that my uncle, who lived in Switzerland, he collaborated with the Nazis in order to get out of Germany to go to Switzerland, and he became a very successful, wealthy man. I had problems with him all my life. He
I
died.
can imagine. Yeah, yeah,
He was my father's brother,
yeah.
and, and his son and I, we have no relationship,
Mm.
none.
Now,
I have relatives in Florida. This is why I am really alone with my family, who are very pro-Jewish,
you
and
mean pro-Zionist?
pro-Zionist,
Yeah.
and some of them live in Israel, and they don't have anything to do with me.
Did your family become Zionist right after the war?
Never. My family was never Zionist,
Uh-huh.
either. Never.
You went to Israel, I understand, in the 70s?
I went to Israel many times.
Ah,
Yes. Early on, I went with my husband, and I went and I saw Israel. I loved Israel.
uh-huh.
I had no idea what was happening in Palestine. I found Israel beautiful, the collective life there, and it was thrilling. And I felt like I was safe.
Hmm.
Amazing. But then later on, I when I went and I went to Ramallah, and my uncle, who was very important, he was very political, took me to Ramallah and to North Israel and to Birzeit, and I began to see, and I was told, I saw the settlements. I began to see what was going on.
Now you say your uncle was important Zionist, or
Hans Lebrecht. He was an uncle. He was a very important. Uh, he was arrested a number of times. He went to Russia. He was a communist, and then he stopped being a communist, and he died a difficult death in Israel. Yeah.
uh-huh. But was he with the left in Israel or?
Yes. Oh, very much
Oh,
so.
I see.
Very much. And it was through him that I became aware of.
Uh-huh. And when you mentioned the collective life, so you went to a kibbutz
I
or?
went to several kibbutzes, and I talked to some of my relatives. They had houses with plants and fruits, and they were happy. And it was amazing. There was nothing about, I mean, the word Palestinian wasn't even expressed, and I was not yet aware.
Mhm. Yeah. So when did things change? You say little by little. What about the 82 war, the Lebanon war? Because
Well,
that was the big thing for me.
yeah, the 82 war, I began to see, I began to hear. I wasn't there, but I began to hear some awful things.
Mhm.
Yes. Um, I think and I think I'm probably skipping, but when I heard that a boat, a small boat, was going to Gaza, I decided I had to go with them, with four Jews and a captain and a couple of refuseniks from Israel. we went and they took me. There were thousands of people who wanted to go. I was very lucky. And that really, really, it was a nightmare. It was as if I was on a boat with Germans around.
Mm.
No,
This is 2010. You have jumped way ahead. That's okay.
right after the Mavi Marmara, which was earlier that spring,
Right.
September. And we were going for the Yom Kippur area time, some food, and bringing one man was bringing his harmonica. He died heartbroken, absolutely heartbroken. And
Wait, he died on the trip?
no, afterwards.
Oh, I see. Yeah. And this was a boat all by itself. It wasn't with other boats?
All catamaran. It was amazing. And that they had fixed up. It had a captain. It had a few places to sleep, a kitchen. And we were on that. Then one morning, we saw these boats in the background. And the IFD, the
Israeli Defense Force.
Yes. And they came, and I'll tell you what eventually happened was they had lasers. They came and they shot two people who were Israelis in the heart. One of them, they survived. But they stepped on all of the harmonicas of this 86-year-old man, the one who died, this wonderful, wonderful man. They came and it was horrible. And then they dragged our boat to Ashdod, and we had to climb up. We were taken to prison.
Prison for the crime of trying to bring some supplies to Gaza.
Yes.
That's our program for today. See you next week at this time. I'm Stanley Heller for the Struggle Video News.